The fetid stream from the sewer pond seeped into a dank mire before they even left the valley. They hugged the mountain's foothills, trying not to attract attention while putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the grated sewer pipe. The day was warmer now, and the filth that permeated their clothes and hair stiffened and flaked off, losing none of its pungency in the process. Dougal was pleased that the char's sense of smell was not as vaunted as legend said, but was aware that even a group of Asura with head colds could smell them from a league away. "Bah!" said Gullick, swatting at a small cloud of flies that had adopted his offal-stained braids. "You would think we were Grawl for all that these flies love us." "More importantly, we need to find cover for the rest of the day," said Ember. "This area is riddled with box canyons like the one the sewer let out of. On occasion, one of our warbands would investigate them as an excuse to get out of the sun." "This way," suggested Colleen, pointing to a particularly nondescript cleft in the stone. "Your dream?" said Riona. "Something like that," said the Sylvari, but she sounded distracted. The haze of the morning had thickened as they moved, and now a thick layer of grim clouds covered the steel-grey sky. Ember led them up a gully cut by a shallow creek and discovered a pool at the far end. They waded into the water, fully clothed, and rinsed out the worst of the foulness, then changed and laid out the wet clothes to dry. They nestled there under the shelter of the gully's winding walls, checking and drying their weapons and armour, and gnawing on cold rations. Ember bit off a short curse. "Bathing in that sewer destroyed half my powder. I don't know if I can trust the rest." She swept the damp cartridges off the rock she was using as a work table, and carefully repacked the remaining shot and powder. "I use a paper soaked in beeswax," suggested Cranks, snapping the wetness out of his muck-spattered hat. "Didn't lose a thing." "I know that we're all exhausted, but we should only rest for a few hours before pressing on," said Riona. Dougal shook his head. "The char patrols are most active during the day, and that's when they can see the farthest. You saw those hills in the distance when we came out? A char lookout atop one of those can see for miles in any direction, and once they spot us, we're in trouble." "Absolutely right," said Ember. "We should stay here until dusk. We have a long path ahead of us, and the rest will do us good." Dougal looked at Riona and said, "About the chains, you..." Riona held up a hand. "Don't say it." She shook her head. "What's done is done. If we break down into might-have-beens and recriminations, we'll be worse off than we are now." Dougal nodded. "Still, they might still be alive?" "They were doing their duty," said Ember, "and foolish enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The same as the Blade Warband. There was no camp back there at the sewer entrance. They were on patrol. Their bad luck and their bad judgment." "It's not like they were a part of your warband," said Riona, "or even your legion. Am I right?" Ember hesitated. "No," she said at last. "They were not." Dougal narrowed his eyes at Ember. Char seemed to value their ranks and their legions highly. Bladebreaker identified his legion from the start. "You didn't." "So?" grunted Ember. "So, which of the legions is yours?" asked Dougal. It does not matter," said Ember. "I work for the Vigil now." Dougal pressed harder. "Is there a reason you won't say?" Ember remained silent. She slid Bladebreaker's sword, now cleaned and oiled, back in her scabbard. It fit well enough. "Are you sure you people weren't looking at my little surprise when it went off?" Crank said with a nasty chuckle. "Because you all seem blind. Look at her armor. Look at her mannerisms. She's from the Ash Legion, or I'm a script." "Are you sure?" Riona asked. "I thought they were all assassins and spies." Ember shot Riona a withering look, but Dougal stared at Ember. Now that he thought about it, she did look like an Ash Legionnaire. Her dark clothing, her wiry build, her style of killing, it all added up. "Not all of them are spies and assassins," Dougal said. "Just the more successful ones. Iron Legion tends to attract warbands with a flair for explosives and weapons. Blood Legion gathers the stronger, more violent types. The Flame Legion still has the most spellcasters and shamans of any group." Riona strode over to confront the Char. "Then tell us who you're really working for, Crusader Doomforge." Dougal expected the Char to react typically, leaping to her feet and snarling threats. Instead, she remained seated and just looked up at Riona. My orders come from General Soulkeeper. Those orders are to find the claw of the Khan-Er and return it to her. But who is your real master? I have no master, Ember growled. Yes, the Asura is correct. I am a part of the Ash Legion, Doom Warband. My Imperator is Malice Sword Shadow. She personally sent me to serve with the Vigil. She knew that I would prove valuable there. To who? Asked Riona. Ember shifted uncomfortably. To Soulkeeper, of course, and to the Ash Legion as well. So, you've been spying on the Vigil for the Ash Legion? Dougal asked. Ember paused for a moment, then nodded. General Soulkeeper knew this from the moment I reported to her. She is no fool. And she let you go on with your charade despite this? Riona's tone betrayed her disbelief. Ember nodded. She got what she wanted, an effective soldier ready to do her bidding, and she gave Imperator Sword Shadow what she wanted, a direct report on the Vigil's activities from someone she could trust. Their interests do not conflict. No harm is done. But if it had been, would you have cared? Said Colleen. I don't much care to work with spies, observed Gullick. Only a fool trusts someone who lies for a living. Riona shook her head. It is impossible to keep many masters. Eventually you must decide where your loyalty lies. Ember responded, Then we are fortunate we have not reached that stage yet. There was a long moment of silence then. Dougal broke it. Sword Shadow is part of the Truce faction. That's it, isn't it? That's why there's no conflict. I could not say, said Ember. We did not discuss the matter. Because if it were known that Sword Shadow supported it, there'd be direct opposition from the other legions, continued Dougal. Ember nodded and said, There are many among the legions who would accept a truce, if couched in the proper terms. But at the same time, there are many who would seek to reconcile with the Flame Legion. The rising bile in her voice indicated where she stood on the issue. Dougal nodded. There are those among the humans who would see us succeed, and those who would prefer to see us fail as well. Cranks coughed and said, Which brings up something I've been thinking about. The gathered group looked at the Asura. He was frowning and turning his hat in his hands as he spoke. When you lot came through the gate from Divinity's Reach, the Vanguard wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be Seraph Guards who were manning the post this morning, and I had an arrangement, if you want to call it that, with their officer of the day. I didn't notice that the Vanguard were on the walls until you came through and all fresh hell broke loose. He looked around the group and his eyes eventually fell on Riona. Somehow word of your arrival preceded you. Riona's back stiffened. Are you saying we have a spy among us? I thought we determined that, said Colleen. That would be Ember. Dougal shushed her. That would be a conclusion to which I would not immediately jump, said Cranks. But since you broached the matter, let us have at it. Who else knows about your recent activities? Riona sat down and thought about it. Almora, of course. A clam, said Cranks. A veritable stone. She barely gives enough information to her subordinates, much less some outside forces. Others in the Vigil, then, said Riona, and Ember slowly nodded in agreement. A good possibility, said Cranks. But Almora also tends to recruit driven, dedicated men and women. He looked at Ember, then at Riona, then said, You snuck out this morning, Riona. Where did you go? You don't think, Riona started, her voice rising. Riona went out scouting, said Dougal quickly. He didn't want the others to know about her doubts and second thoughts in this matter. Not at this time, not on top of everything else. She thought there was some way down off the walls. That's where we found her, not 5 minutes from your door. She was concerned that you might not return. Or that I might buy my own safety for your own, said Cranks sharply. Don't be shy. I know Asura that would sell their own birth parents for a safe bunk and a solid sinecure. I could have brought the Vanguard back with me, if that had been my intention, and sped us all a stroll through the sewers. I could have done the same, I suppose, said Riona. And then there is this shared dream the Silvari has. Colleen started. It doesn't work like that, finished Dougal, his brow furrowed. Agreed. But we've been moving around so much on so little sleep that I haven't thought much about what's bothering me about all of this. He turned to Garlic, who was resting against a large boulder, watching the others talk. How did you find me? The Norn blanched visibly, as if Dougal had struck him. What do you mean? In Divinity's Reach, said Dougal. I arrived there, and within the day, you were in my room, drunk, and loaded for bear. Garlic smiled weakly. I thought we had gotten beyond all that. Surely our experiences since have convinced you of my good intentions? How did you know? Dougal asked, pressing hard now. Garlic's lips disappeared as the Norn obviously thought about how to phrase things, then abandoned any hope for dissembling and said, The Asura. Me? Said Cranks, surprised. The other one, said Garlic. The one that was with you and Guido when she died. Clag, said Colleen, and she made the name sound like a curse. Clag, said Cranks. Clag, said Garlic, snapping his fingers as the memory settled in. He came to see me. I had been drinking. The Salty Dog was the tavern, I think. He brought me a few drinks, told me what a wretch and a scoundrel you were, and that you claimed all the credit in the battle that cost my dear cousin her life. That you denied her story, and then he told me where to find you. He wound you up and let you loose, said Cranks. Sounds like an Asura to me. I did say I was sorry about all that, said Garlic. That is one reason I wanted to help you after I sobered up. Did Clag tell you how he knew where I was? Said Dougal. At that moment, I was not concerned with such details, said Garlic. And yet he knew, said Riona. If Clag knew where Dougal was, what else did he know about the Vigil safe house? Yeah, Dougal said. And did he get into Ebonhawk before us? Asura come through the gate all the time, said Cranks. None of them were named Clag, but that means nothing. He could have walked right in under my nose. All this is meaningless now, said Ember. Assuming that the Asura was hunting you, we probably lost him back in Ebonhawk. I would like to see him follow us through those sewers and down that cliff. The sewers, said Riona. We met the gate guards there as well. I'm aware of that, said Cranks. It is not outside the realm of possibility, though it would require more initiative than I've seen from most Ebonhawkers, present company and all that. He waved at Dougal and Riona. But add that to the fact that a Char patrol was waiting for us at the bottom of the waterfall. We just dropped into their laps. But none of them seem to know exactly what our merry band is up to, said Dougal. Neither the Vanguard nor the Warband. It is possible, said Riona, that someone knows something is going on, but is not sure what it is. There are those who would be opposed to any cooperation between Char and human, regardless of purpose. Or who merely don't like not knowing, said Cranks. A silence descended on the group, broken only by Garlic's deep yawn. Right, said Dougal. Now that we've pounded this subject flat, let's get some rest. I'll stand watch for the first few hours. Not alone, said Ember. I'll stay up, said Colleen. Cranks has been up since we met him, and probably needs a rest. That's the smartest thing I've heard since I last opened my mouth, said Cranks, lying down and using his lumpy pack as a pillow. He dropped his hat over his face and was asleep in an instant. I could use a rest as well, said Riona. She leaned over Dougal and softly whispered, Thanks. Then she found a comfortable spot, not too far from where Ember curled up on herself, and was soon breathing deeply herself. Dougal looked at Riona and wondered how long this calm would last before their next storm. Probably until he did something she didn't like, he thought. He looked near the entrance to their small oasis, and Colleen was there, cross-legged in the sun and perfectly still. She could be asleep or dead, for all her outward appearance showed. He walked over and saw that although her eyes were open, her eyelids did not move. She did not blink, and Dougal wondered if the Sylvari did that just to reassure other races. Dougal cleared his throat, and Colleen closed her eyes, then opened them again. Suddenly they were luminous and full of life once more. Is there a problem, Dougal Keen? She said. You think me a spy? No, said Dougal. But I do want to talk to you about what you did back there. With the guard. Wyn? She dropped her chin to her chest in a very human impersonation of a pout. I meant no harm. It was the same thing that I did before, beneath Lion's Arch with that skeleton. And it served the same purpose, to set off a trap so that we could not suffer from it. But as a result, now Crusader Riona is irritated at me. She looked at him with her luminous eyes. As I suspect you are? Not irritated, said Dougal. Disturbed. Necromancers among the humans have been considered rather unsettling for centuries, even though they work in magic like elementalists, mesmers, and other practitioners. Yet, among my people, it is just a type of magic, said Colleen. No different than divination or golomancy or any of the strange mathematical offshoots that the Asura practice. I think that's part of it, said Dougal. The Asura look strange, so they aren't really judged the same way. You look a bit more like us, and therefore... He let his voile trail off, unsure where to go next. When we act differently, it reminds you how separate we really are as a people, she said. Pretty much, said Dougal. In the future, I want you to think about how others will react to what you do. So you're saying, said Colleen, you don't want me to turn you into a zombie once you die? I think the others would be disturbed by that, said Dougal. And you shouldn't turn any of them into the undead either. Not even Ember? Said Colleen, her words belied by her smile. Not even Ember, said Dougal. If you wish, said Colleen, and turned back to watch the entrance niche to the valley. Good, said Dougal, and when Colleen did not add anything, he walked a couple of paces away and added, Good. He found his own spot, in the shade, from which to watch both Colleen and the entrance, as well as the others. It was as close to tranquility as he could hope to find, here beyond the walls of Evanhawk, on the verge of enemy territory. He shook his head. Gullick was right. The differences of this group could tear it apart. Ember was loyal to the Ash Legion, known for their secretive ways. Riona was both warm and cold to him by turn, and probably was going through all the same conflicted feelings he felt. Colleen was sometimes brilliant, sometimes out of step with everyone else. He knew nothing about cranks, other than he had just gotten them out of a sealed city. And Gullick himself seemed much deeper than his bumpkin Norn exterior appeared. Was there more going on with him as well? Dougal let out a deep sigh, and wondered how they would even reach Ascalon City, much less find the claw, even if it was where he thought it was. He did not mean to fall asleep in that warm afternoon shade, but Colleen was suddenly there, touching him on the shoulder. I thought I should wake you first, she said. I didn't want the others to know you drifted off. Dougal stood up and yawned and checked the sun. The shadows of the valley were just touching the far side of the vale, but it would be several hours before it was dark enough to move. Stretching, he stumbled off to wake Riona and Ember, and then get himself some guiltless sleep.